If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is serial entrepreneur, investor, and author Rags Gupta. During the past 2 years, Rags has built 5 companies, one of which IPO'd and another acquired. He is currently president of Butlr, the world's first 100% wireless, anonymous people counting and occupancy sensing platform. Now that's a mouthful, and I can't wait to hear what Rags has to say about that. But let's just say Rags knows a lot about the future of work. And before we finish today, he's going to share some of this with us. Rags, welcome to the show. And before we dive in, would you mind telling our audience more about your background and what factors led you to the anonymous people counting industry?
Thanks, Arnette. It's great to be here, and thanks so much for having me on. I've been in tech since the late 90s during the dot-com boom and then the bust, and so this is probably my 7th startup or so since then, depending on how you count them. What I've realized is I really enjoy being at the nexus of when new sets of technologies are ready to be commercialized, whether it was the internet, the World Wide Web back in the day, to streaming audio and video and cloud, and more recently, Internet of Things and automation and robotics and so on. And so that's, I think partly the journey I've been on is really getting really interested in some of the use cases and applications of sensors and being able to sense our environment and then deliver value based on the data that's collected. And that's how I got to Butlr, 2.5 years ago or so.
Yeah. So help our audience understand what you mean by the future of work, and why is this particularly important to HR professionals, and what's next?
Yeah, look, I'd say even before the pandemic, the nature of work has been changing, and that's just, it's driven by technologies, it's driven by generational change, and really what we've seen is that the pandemic has really accelerated a lot of what was already in flight, beforehand. So you can think about whether it's some large secular trends that are out there, right? So one is a shrinking labor force, and one that's oftentimes demographically getting older. This is, again, I've seen that very much before the pandemic, and here we're facing that now with reduced services and people struggling to hire. There's other sort of changes as well. The expectation of this new generation that's entering the workforce in terms of what they value at a work setting, to just the recognition that talent, especially knowledge work, is this X factor that can make or break a company. It can just drive a ton of value or destroy it. And so as a result, HR professionals, whereas historically they may have been seen as more of an administration and compliance function, have really been elevated to the C-suite, to become a key business partner to the CEO and the business itself on talent and how to get the most out of it and retain it and attract the best talent.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you point out that even before the pandemic, that companies were starting to think differently about, where employees worked and how they worked. What trends did you see that was leading up to this even before the pandemic?
Well, before then, it was really around how to attract the best talent and how to retain that talent. And there's a number of different tools and tactics that can be used around it, whether it's the workplace, the physical workplace itself, to the policies that that one has in place to be able to foster the best kind of work environment. And so that was very much trends that we had picked up on back in the day, and then really I would say that the pandemic kind of forced a lot of companies back to first principles, and also has caused a lot of experimentation. I kind of liken it to this snow globe where someone just shook it and the snow's coming down, and every one of those snowflakes is a company trying to figure it out their own way, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at first principles, I mean, does every company need every team to be at their desk every day, right? Row upon row of desks, right? If you were to start that today, you would probably not architect it that way, right? So I think there's also this realization that the old ways of working were kind of artifacts of the industrial kind of revolution, really, right? Where it started in the factories and then went into knowledge work in the offices.
Yeah. It's interesting, even today, after, with the pandemic being significantly behind us on most levels, I'm starting to hear companies like, Twitter, Elon Musk saying, you're getting back in the office if you want a job. When you hear a leader, I think JP Morgan has done a very similar notice from Jamie Dimon to his team. When you hear things like that, how does that make you feel about the communications taking place? Is that an area for improvement on communication? Is that more of a trend that we're going to see leaders encouraging teams back in?
I think it's partially a reflection of culture and values. And so when Elon Musk did that, there was a big bat signal saying we're this sort of hardcore, intense place, and if that's not for you, then we're not the place for you, right? So it's really reflected in the culture that every company and every CEO is trying to foster and show. And at the same time, there's all these companies. Shopify is a good example, which have really pivoted to being remote first, and then bringing their, but having teams get together for on-sites and, teaming and collaboration, right? And there's all these different other ways of architecting, right? What the right policy is, not just within companies, but also within teams and groups. So what might work for a sales team may not make sense for an engineering team. And that actually makes sense because, again, it's not one size fits all. There's different types of work. By the way, it also varies by region as well. And so it's a lot more nuanced than it was before. And I actually think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think our workforce today, where I'm hearing more stories of employees demanding for more flexibility. Are there other areas of flexibility, not just the work locations, other areas that you see and that, we can bring those into the workplace without impacting activity and the consequences that come from change?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it really, first of all, it goes down to what type of a culture and workplace are you trying to foster, both whether it's at the office, at the physical workplace, or at the home. There's certainly, we're just seeing a lot of experimentation, right? So there could be things like neighborhooding and desk sharing in the physical office. We've seen a number of companies go to kind of, start with remote first, but require people to be on site together in an office. I've heard 2 to 4 weeks a year, sometimes more, depending on the team and what's going on. So there's sort of a travel component to it. So again, there's flexibility, but then there's also an expectation that you're going to be here for these sort of on-site get-togethers. Certainly having a parity between your setup at home and the office, makes a lot of sense. And then even just kind of having a recognition that people have a lot of meetings, and so why go into the office if you're going to be on a Zoom all day long? You're there to actually physically interact with people. And so, if you've heard of companies doing, things like certain days where you're going to be in, but there's no formal meetings planned, right? Or, having no meeting Fridays so that people can actually, have flexibility in their lives that way.
Yeah. For organizations and companies that want to bring the workforces back now, and we just talked a couple of them, are there any other best practices that you can recommend in this effort?
It's every culture has a different spin on it, right? First is we've noticed that there are cohorts of people that crave being in and the energy and buzz of the office and learning from one another and so on. And so sometimes it's it's just sort of setting expectations on, hey, here's when these teams are going to be in. Sometimes it's amenities and programming. So I was taking a lunch at the LinkedIn office late last year in Silicon Valley, and it was buzzing. I mean, it was, there was just like so much great energy and buzz and just all the different areas. And, they've invested a lot in their food services and that experience of kind of when you walk in, how you get welcomed and how you get ushered in. And you could tell, I mean, the parking lot was full. And so, we've certainly seen amenities and certainly, food. I mean, it's such a human thing, right? To break bread together and connect that way. So that's certainly a popular one. Having executives walk the walk, right? In terms of coming into the office and walking the floor and just being accessible. That's another thing that's certainly a best practice because, people want to, there's sort of this level of accessibility and just presence that is, very effective in bringing people back as well.
Yeah. So when it comes to technologies, what are some of the technologies you use to improve hiring, retention, building healthier cultures, and facilitate communication and collaboration? Any tips you can offer into this technology?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's the basics and the foundations, whether it's having a good applicant tracking system and onboarding flow, whatever platform you use for onboarding, to the right, remote setups, whether it's Zoom or whatever it is, to the right collaboration tools, like a Slack or a Notion or whatever people do. And then you kind of got the next level, which is around having people, what's their experience like at the workplace? It's often called employee experience. So that can be things like desk booking and room booking. It can be things like using occupancy sensors like Butlrs to inform how busy areas are for people. Whether it's the gym or the kitchen or certain conference rooms or so on, so that people feel like they have a choice. They feel like they can choose to be in a quieter area or a busier area. They feel they have agency that way, right? We've seen companies investing in air quality sensing so that they can give that picture to people of what's the quality of the air. With COVID, that made people a lot more aware and sensitive to things like indoor air quality and pathogens and things like that as well. So we're seeing a lot of that sort of experimentation and using technologies to create a better experience for people. And by the way, there's others. I mean, we've seen some buildings actually in Chicago through one of our partners where you walk in, you don't have to take anything out of your pocket. It just senses that you're there. The turnstile's open. There's an elevator that comes and takes you to your floor. You don't have to do anything, right? So there's those kinds of technologies which involve, occupancy sensing. They involve access control and connecting these different systems that have often been disparate into an experience that can, make that can really kind of facilitate the day for the person in question.
Yeah.
And then I will say that I'm just waiting for this sort of office chat bot, right? Through these, chat GPT and large language model technology platforms out there to help with collaboration and communications as well. So I'm sure it's only a matter of days or weeks until we see experimentation with that platform.
Yeah. So I understand Butlr has some unique sensing technology, and it gives some insights into workplace dynamics. Can you drill down in that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So first is a little bit of kind of background. We were spun out of MIT in 2019. And part of the insight there was that to have a smart building, a smart shop, a smart workplace, you first had to sense people in it. And to sense people in it at the time, you either had a very old school motion detector or you had a camera, and both of them have pretty big issues. And so our founders used thermal technology to create a thermal sensing platform. You can see the sensor here, very compact, and all we're sensing is the heat in the environment. So if you have the sensor above me, it's going to sense me as a little blob of heat and how I move around. And this technology is being used by workplace and real estate executives to understand how their office, how their floor plan is being used. So we're almost like an analytic system for a product, and the product happens to be the physical workplace. And the reason is oftentimes, before, you either had surveys where you asked people how many times did you come in, how many times, did you book a conference room, those kinds of things, or they'd have consultants come in with clickers and clipboards and do like a sampling study for a few days, and that was that. Now they're using technology like ours to really understand actual behavior and intent. And what they're finding is, first is, surveys do not tell the whole story. The actual behavior is very different than what people say they're going to do. The second is that the office layout that may have worked in 2019 or 2018 is not necessarily the layout that works now, right? So usually what we've found is a desire for more phone booth for people that are in the office to go do a Zoom call or private calls. Usually, again, I'm generalizing, but having to switch the ratio of desks to be a lower ratio of desks compared to other types of seating and in other types of kind of workspace. So a lot more collaboration areas and soft seating, and again, the idea being that you're coming into the office to collaborate and team, and that requires maybe different type of setup than your straight up desks. And that setup, can actually also contribute to attendance levels as well. So that's an important thing to bear in mind, because especially because these companies are spending so much money on office and rent. And so we always say you want to experiment, but you want to instrument to know how your experiments are working and know where you want to double down.
Yeah. So this insight that you're getting is really giving HR teams and the HR professionals a lot of additional insight into their jobs, right? I mean, and it requires them to make some initiatives that can better the work environment for everybody.
That's right. I mean, it's literally like we say, we say the office is a product. You want to understand how your product is working and how it's being used and so on. And we are not physically able to capture anything personally identifiable. So there's no issue on privacy. We can't tell, gender, let alone anything else. And so, it becomes a tool for an HR professionals, in their toolkit to be able to really understand, are the things we're doing driving people back? How are they using it? How can we have a better environment for them?
Yeah. So from your experience, you built, 5 companies, I think it is. And, I think you've got some unique insight into building talent networks. And can you give any strategies that are good for HR teams to enhance these networks, and especially with your technology that's coming around?
Yeah, I mean, it is, talent is everything these days, and having, having a pool of like a talent floor network, as you say, is what the smart, HR and talent people are doing. And it may be candidates that are passive, that, may not be ready, but in a year or two, they're ready to, actually make a move, or vice versa. But kind of, there's a saying, always be recruiting, and, shouldn't just be relying on inbound, but also outbound, people you've come across in your network and impressed by, and just start building relationships, even if they're pretty, lightweight at first. And there are platforms out there that help manage this, almost like a CRM system, and that is, certainly a best practice for, for some of the the companies out there. This is what the big headhunting firms do, right? And that's their job to do, is to build out these talent networks. And so, yeah, very much agree.
And I know we started the conversation with some focus on the future of work. And what can you share with leaders on best approach to embrace the future here, and what can we be expecting?
I mean, look, the nature of work is changing, whether you like it or not, and it's just sort of this inevitable thing that if people don't adapt and make some decisions, there's the risk that they'll be left behind, right? If they don't change, then the access to talent may be different for them, and and they just have to realize that. And so, I'm certainly don't have a crystal ball on what all the changes will be, but demographically and generationally and technology, all these factors are really combining to change the nature of work this next decade, more so than the last few decades. So I think it's a really exciting time to be in the industry.
Yeah. So as we're about to wrap up today, Rags, one of the questions that I ask all of our guests is, if S2 Verify were to conduct a background screening check on you, would there be any surprising discoveries?
Well, nothing too scary, I would hope. But no, I'd say one thing they would find is I drove an auto rickshaw, otherwise known as a tuk-tuk, across India, and it's also indirectly how I met my wife.
Oh, fabulous. Fabulous. Well, look, would you mind sharing with our audience where they can find more information?
Sure.
And of course, your book, we haven't given, I think the book is 1 to 10, and share some insights on that.
Thank you. Yeah. So, so Butlr, butlr.io, and my email address is rags, R-A-G-S, @butlr.io. Love to hear from you if any of this resonated. And you also mentioned this. One of my pandemic projects was to write a book. It's called 1 to 10, about the growing pains phase of startups, and how to get from 1 to 10 million in revenues, and the different kind of challenges around that around that journey for founders. So you can find that on Amazon or other bookstores as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining today, and I know our audience is going to appreciate insights. And for our audience that's listening, please next week for an interview with Alex Ganetta. He's the head of people at Enable. That's a collaborative rebate management platform. We will talk all things people, and why HR professionals need to be rethinking about moving away from the mindset of HR for employees on the payroll to the mindset of HR for the entire ecosystem. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.